when we are approaching self-pleasure in a conscious way, and what I mean by that is we're going into it with this intention to connect more deeply with our bodies instead of with an intention of trying to just kind of take the edge off of the stress of life. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to use this powerful sexual energy as a direct portal to the divine, it is so possible.
Luci, I'm gonna come in hot off the bat. So
Okay.
What are the fundamentals of good sex, and what are some common mistakes that most people are making?
Oh, some fundamentals. So the number one thing that comes to mind anytime something like this question comes up is presence. And so if we're not actually being present in our bodies, if we're not in our bodies, if we're more in our heads, and you might hear this often, right? It's not news, but that's reliably the top thing that I see keeping people from having really great sex. It's not the techniques, it's not the know-how, it's not what you're doing with your body, how you're using the toys, none of that. If you don't have the presence, then you're not going to feel that connection. And for you to be able to have that presence, you've got to be willing to meet yourself in those deep places. So for us, there's usually a time of like a buffer time where we just slow down and we get really present with each other. A go-to thing could be just looking into each other's eyes. I know that eye gazing gets kind of a cheesy rap. They're like, oh, gaze into my eyes. But it's real. It's like if you really get present again with the soul that's behind these eyes, this person sitting in front of you, it's you get that intimacy that maybe you haven't been attuned to all day running around in your life.
Also, within that, how much of presence is taken away by, insecurities, shame? I think that plays a big part too, right? The more someone has, in my experience when I was young, having insecurity issues and past traumas, I had no idea about that, took away my ability to be present with my partner. So how important is that clearing of the wounding, of removing insecurities and stuff?
Yeah, that's a really big one. Thank you for bringing that up. There was one, I think it was a video, maybe sometime last year, where I shared about the things that keep us from being present. And so much of that is the internalized shame, the self-judgment, the self-criticism. If we're so wrapped up listening to the voices of fear and criticism and judgment, there's no space to really feel that intimate connection with someone else. So this is an ongoing thing. It's not just a one-time gaze into each other's eyes for 2 minutes and you're going to have great sex. It's a step and it's a practice, a practical practice. But as a way of life, the more aware we are of the ways that we cut ourselves down and where we carry that shame, and then we're present with that and we open our hearts and are willing to let the love in and release the shame and judgment. I know it's easier said than done, but that is such a big part of it.
How do you notice shame shows up in sexual experiences? I think in my experience, has been the biggest thing for me to heal. And it's affected the most things in my sexual experiences. How can people be aware of when it comes up, and what's the effect of it if it's uncleared?
So a couple ways that I think immediately to help bring awareness to where that might be happening. And one is when you feel so if you tune into your energy at any given time, it can feel kind of like something can feel expansive or it can feel like contracting. So if you're in a sexual experience and you find yourself feeling kind of like dissociating but even more subtly kind of contracting and pulling away energetically, your bodies can be doing the things, but energetically you might feel more just closed in. So noticing that, I love to bring attention as a woman and just having a womb and everything and this physical body. I love to bring attention to where in my body I'm feeling that energetic closure. And is this something that in that moment I can bring awareness to and choose to just open a little bit more and feel that flow of love a little bit more with me and Ryan, that's my husband's name. Or is it something that I'm too far gone and I need to ask him to do something different, or we need to stop, or we need to switch directions of something. But that is one way to check in. Another way is if you find yourself telling stories and like, oh my God, I'm so bad at this. This is stupid. What am I doing? It's taking me too long. Any any story of criticism or judgment is the big red flag of like, oh, I'm carrying some shame about this. Or if you're afraid to speak up about what you want or your desires, the impact of not doing that is, well, just more closure, more distance. And closure and distance are not bad, but if you want intimacy, there's got to be that willingness to open.
Assuming it plays a role as well in a woman's ability to orgasm. I think it's a common thing. In my experience, exes and stuff, that some had a hard time experience that. In my experience, the more I noticed a woman was closed off to feel her emotions and to process them, the more she couldn't do that. And the ones that are more open and feeling everything, the more they could easily do that. Is that a connection? And more so, what are some points you see in women who can't orgasm, and how can they come back to a place where they can freely?
So the orgasm is a point of complete surrender, right? Like if there's some part of her, or I'll just relate this back to myself because I have been that woman who just really had a hard time and had to go through all these mental gymnastics just to get to an orgasm because that's just where I was at for a long time. I had a lot of internalized shame about sex being bad too. But anyways, the more connected, there is this relationship between the heart and the yoni. And so the more connected a woman is to her heart, the more open her heart is, the more she's actually open to feeling love and receiving love, not just from her partner or from her family members, but from the source itself, from love itself. The more she's going to, be able to feel the sensations in her body and just drop into that space mentally without having to go through all the hurdles. So this is why, again, making it a practice to feel what's happening in the body. For me, that was a really big thing, is every single day having these, what I learned later on to call embodiment practices, and a self-pleasure practice. That's where I learned how to be more at ease in my pleasure. Before that, I didn't realize how much I rejected pleasure and how unsafe I felt in the experience of pleasure because I thought I had to earn it. I thought there must be something else I need to do, or it has to be harder than this. And then there's all the religious trauma and things thrown in there too, and birth trauma.
Go into that. So you mentioned that sex was bad for you. You mentioned some of this religious stuff. Take me through that. What was your experience in your youth, or things that led you down the road you are now? I think hurt people heal people in a way, and whatever we specialize in is where we were most hurt. So I'm curious as to what sparked you on this journey, and what did you have to overcome to learn what you know now?
Oh. So when it relates to specifically the sexual aspect, again, the self-pleasure practice was the big opening for me. But to get to that point, I actually received that message in a meditation to begin doing a self-pleasure practice every day. And I was so resistant. I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Why would I do that? I have very low sex drive. I'm not one of those women who need to get off to feel okay. I don't need to take the edge off. I was just very content to do as little as I could in the realm of my sexuality. And I completely attached it to my husband giving me pleasure. He's always been a very generous lover, but God bless him, he had to be very patient, extremely patient. So I grew up as a pastor's daughter, and I had from an early age a belief that I picked up along the way that touching yourself is wrong. Don't be too pretty or too sexy or too sexual as a teenager, right? Or you're going to ask for the wrong attention. If something happens to you, you're asking for it. So this is not just the religious part, but also just the cultural aspect that a lot of women simply feel unsafe existing in their bodies. But the idea that masturbation could send me to hell, yeah, it struck a little bit of fear in me. And that really did mess with me. It affected me many years into marriage. When I was supposed to be able to enjoy sex, all of this shame still plagued me. So that's why the place where it began to really unravel was in the self-pleasure practice And it's a practice of being deeply present with what is. It's not just to try to get to an orgasm as fast as possible. There's all kinds of benefits to that, right? But it's
Mhm.
the practice of deep presence. So for any woman who is kind of wanting to explore that path, I would say maybe see where the self-pleasure practice might take her.
What's for people who've had similar experiences to you, who are tied in shameful ways of viewing their own sexuality and their own self-pleasure practices, what can they be doing? Lay out some plans or steps to for women like that to start healing that shame and start giving themselves that experience. Like, what did you have to do? What's the journey you had to take through that people can replicate to start feeling better, connecting with their partners sexually?
Yeah. So again, it comes back to the self, right? So if I'm able to open, just like you said, I love that you began with that. What can they do? What can they do with themselves? Um, so what I did, I mean, I'd been meditating for, I don't even know how many years, a lot of years. Just something to help clear my mind. But we have to really explore beyond that. What we want is to do those practices that help our nervous systems feel more at ease. Because when we are in this responding to threat mode in the sympathetic nervous system, right, we're not really able to open to that deep pleasure and exquisite kind of presence with a partner. So what are those practices that I'll share what I did. And this is a lot of what I share in my courses too. I have guided practices and everything. But ultimately, each person has got to explore, go on their own little journey, and discover what practices help their bodies return to that place of just feeling whole and at ease. What I did, I dance. I dance. I love to dance. I wasn't allowed to dance growing up. And so as soon as I could dance, I tried and I sucked at it. But now I pole dance. I've been pole dancing for about 3.5 years. I've become pretty good at it. But me growing up with scoliosis too, there was this kind of fear that I don't want to, paralyze myself or something, do something crazy. So when I began to do the embodied kind of dancing, it was the slow, it could be anything from a slow, very sensual kind of feeling, working with energy in my palms. It could be that to the other end of the spectrum where I'm just like, I'm just in my room and I'm listening to this very activating music and I'm tapping into this different aspect of this feminine energy that's more wild and dark and edgy. So the practice in that is, what does my body need right now? What is the energy that needs to be expressed through me in this moment? So the container is I'm doing the dance thing for 15 minutes. But within that is what's alive in this. There is no specific agenda. Another piece of that for me has been the self-pleasure practice. So again, that has a lot of different twists and turns that it could take. But those two things, I would say, practicing being more in the body. And within that, there is a whole lot more that we can explore. But if I had to simplify it, I would say those two things: movement, the somatic stuff, movement, breath, and sound, and self-pleasure.
That makes sense. I'm curious if you have any insight into the masculine side of things. It's like, most self-pleasurement for men is just these days, unfortunately, putting on porn, grabbing your dick and just, jerking around. That's most men's self sexual practice. I'm curious if you have any insight into that and the effect of that in the bedroom. I think it's a good topic to get on because I've seen it in my own life that, I used to be addicted to porn since I was like 11, 10 until I was about 19. I could see the massive effect that had on me in the way I had sex, where I just kind of treat it like that. So I'm curious to see, your take on that masculine side of things and how it affects the bedroom and the woman in question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, so a lot of the same things that I work with my female clients on also apply to my male clients. And so when we are approaching self-pleasure in a conscious way, and what I mean by that is we're going into it with this intention to connect more deeply with our bodies instead of with an intention of trying to just kind of take the edge off of the stress of life. And again, there's nothing
Mm.
wrong with that. But if you want to use this powerful sexual energy as a direct portal to the divine, it is so possible. You can access that in a way like no other. Because again, when you're in that orgasm, in that moment of complete surrender, it's like a little death, a little birth, a little death and a little rebirth. And you can kind of breeze through it, or you can really milk it for every drop it's worth. And for a man or someone with a penis, right? If he's just stroking his dick and his whole energy and awareness and attention is focused on his dick, he's missing out on so much. So one of the first things that I encourage men to do in a conscious self-pleasure practice is that as they just slow down, slow down, slow way down. There is no there is a kind of we build these neural pathways, right? We want the path of least resistance. We want to get to the goal as quickly as possible. And the same thing goes for masturbation. And so when we make that simple shift of slowing down, noticing what else you're feeling in your body. As he's stroking himself, he can notice what else is he feeling in his body, like what's coming alive in his belly, in his sacral, in his heart, in his soul, just like up here in his third eye, like just really using this energy. So I like to play with the energetics. And some people will call that tantric and some will not. I don't know. That's up to them. But I love to work consciously with these energetics, and whatever energy he's feeling in his dick, he can expand that and draw that up into his entire body. And by the time that he gets to the point of release, there is so many, so I'll just give you one example. Same thing applies for women. I've literally done this practice where I will be like, imagine myself surrounded by the presence of the divine masculine himself. So it's not a particular man, it's not my husband, it's not a face, it's not a body, it's this like energy that I want to be completely ravished by, right? And like taken care of. And I'll hear that voice telling me like, I've got you, it's safe to let go. I've got you, I'm here, I'll take care of you. All the things that women want to hear in bed, right? But I'm hearing this from the source. And by the time I get to the point of release, it's just like, it's a moment of complete ecstasy. And that is the portal through which, if you imagine you are traveling through into another realm. I've been in altered states of consciousness in that moment after orgasm that parallel to what I've experienced on plant medicine. And so men can access this too. I know that physiologically there is that refractory period that kicks in before too long for male bodies that women don't exactly have. For us, it's like we're open, we can have another orgasm, and then we're more open, and then we can have another one. For men, maybe they can get right back in it and go for round two in sex with a partner. But often there's a refractory period where he kind of loses that like energy, right? So another thing too is that if he's not ejaculating, he can learn how to have non-ejaculatory orgasms and do that multiple times. So again, you got to find what floats your boat and what works for your body and your particular journey. But the bigger overarching thing here is bringing more consciousness into the energy that we are working with, and being expanding on the awareness of the sensations in our bodies instead of
Yeah.
focusing just on the dick.
It was powerful when you mentioned the power of slowing down when a man is masturbating. I used to struggle with premature ejaculation, and talking to most men, they also do, because it's that habit, right? I believe that how you love yourself is similar to how you can be loved, right? I do think that there's something in the way you kind of have sex with yourself is the way you do it to others in some way. There's some link, in my opinion. So for me, if it was just like quickly going in there, just jerking off and releasing quickly, that would translate into my real sexual experiences. So for men listening, the more I slowed down, like you said, just paid attention to my body somatically and took my time, the more that transferred to the bedroom, which I think is good to know, because that was a big thing I learned that helped a lot. A different point. What do you think women need from men sexually they're not getting? And how can they speak up for those things that they want?
Oh, what are they getting? I keep coming back to presence. Like they're not getting the depth of presence, because if he is unwilling to meet himself in those dark places
Hmm.
and stop running away through porn, through work, through booze, through whatever it might be, whatever his thing might be, her heart will instinctually know that it's not completely safe to open to him. And if her heart is not open to him, her body is going to have a really hard time opening to him too. So this extends beyond the bedroom. Again, the way that I look at it is what's happening in the bedroom, what's happening sexually is a big mirror of what's happening in the greater scope of life
Yeah.
and in the relationship. So in a very physiological, practical, from that standpoint, like you said, when you were masturbating quickly, then you tended to finish quickly in sex, because our bodies are learning. They're learning. We're the way that we're experiencing pleasure this way, it's not just going to automatically switch. And now we're doing this. We're teaching our bodies how to open to pleasure and experience it. And so, what a lot of women are missing is that experience of a truly embodied man that isn't, as much as he wants to pleasure her and wants to last longer, for example, his body's just like, oh, we got to get there. We got to get there. There's a sense of urgency and maybe even anxiety that accompanies a lot of men. I've heard from so many men who experience that.
Do you think that some of the reasons, I think one of the most common sex complaints is couples who become complacent. It just stops happening. Do you think one of the main reasons it stops happening is what you're saying? Is that the man isn't being present with his woman. He's not seeing her for her feelings. Do you think that's a prime cause for a lack of sexual desire?
I think that disconnection is a prime cause, and that's a contributing factor to that. And also, you got to think of it this way: if the reward of doing something is non-existent, or is out of proportion to the amount of effort it takes to initiate sex, to get in the
Mhm.
bed, to do the things, to actually do the fucking, like it's like all these
Yeah.
things. If it's not worth it, then they're going to stop trying. What's the motive? Like, why? And especially if they're not connected, then there's really no intrinsic motivation, no heart pull
Yeah.
to do it. And couples will find themselves there from time to time in this like roommate phase,
Yeah.
often after having kids or a big life change or something like that. It's not impossible to get out of.
So what can be done to bring that sexual polarity back up or cultivate it even deeper and for a couple?
For one, the first step I would say is for individually for them to return to their erotic aliveness. Like find that not just sexually, but what's turning you on in general in life. Do you enjoy your life? Like, do you feel alive? Are you living in your truth? Because if you're not, your sexual energy is going to be impacted by that. When you get into this space of, expanding consciousness and liberating your heart and all of these things, your sexual essence, your sexual energy becomes inseparable from you being in your truth, because you're no longer compartmentalizing that to sex you, this like the you in the
Yeah.
bedroom. It's something that actually fuels your entire life. So connect with that. And that's why for the women and for the men too, if that's something they feel, led to, is explore something like a self-pleasure practice where you can be more present with, man, face all the demons that are there lurking
Yeah.
in the shadows. And then two, I would say begin to explore erotic play that's not exactly sexual with each other.
How do you separate horniness from sexual aliveness? I think 'cause at points where I've been super depressed as a man or down, I still have the urge to, ejaculate and have sex. How can we separate that from actually feeling sexually alive? Like what's the difference for men especially? Because men will always be horny, I think. So it's like how do they know when it's like just that or when they're actually alive and emitting energy, sexual energy?
And the first thing that comes to mind is Ryan when he was in those 2.5 years of disability and depression. Because even in that time, he still wanted to have sex. It was kind of
Yeah.
like it was the most intimate opportunity we had to kind of keep our sanity
Yeah.
and some semblance of connection. Um, so I think that there is, so you can think of it this way, there is the physiological, let's say, need to release. And specifically for men, I will say, like, just the fluid and everything. If you don't know what else to do with it, there's that, and then there's the vibrance that you feel from that. That's why a lot of men who practice something like a semen retention will say, like, they feel so invigorated because they're learning to cultivate this relationship with their sexual energy and the sensations in their body, and kind of in like re what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of recalibrate in their minds the story that they're telling themselves about it, about what that feeling means. And if every time they feel that, the story is, I need to come, I need to ejaculate, I need to release, instead of like, oh, I'm feeling like my life force. And then they can again, just with that awareness, choose to feel into what that is. There are a lot of specific alchemical practices that you can do that a lot of the guys that do semen retention practice with breath work and visualization and energy. But ultimately, it's channeling that in a way that is not straight out of their dick. And I think that that can get kind of, semen retention kind of takes a weird turn where men make everything about not spilling their seed, and then they're not actually enjoying sex with their partner anymore, or they're never ejaculating, or they're having issues. But the idea behind it, I really do value, that you
I
can
agree.
use that as a well of energy.
What's that line? Let's try and figure it out right now. What's that? Because I'm in that line right now. I'm dabbling in when to do it, when not to do it. So when's it beneficial for men to practice semen retention, in your opinion? And when does it become a shadow of rigidity, like too strict about it and it's not benefiting them? What's that line?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I think that that line exists in a different place for each man. That's the tricky part. There's so much nuance in that. Like, he could be doing great that week, and that could be exactly the path for him. And then the next week, he's totally in the shadow, in that virgin shadow of like, I need to be chaste, I'm being a good boy. And I think, again, that awareness is so important. So if you're tuned to like, oh, does this feel nourishing or does this feel restricting? And that's a question that I like to come back to, even with my own self-pleasure practice. If I got into so it's like the opposite extreme, right? If I'm like, I missed a day masturbating, oh my God, I'm not, I'm not disciplined enough. So I have found myself over the past several years of doing this particular practice in those moments where I realize that it's become more of a chore or more of a burden, instead of a nourishment and a
Hmm.
deeper connection. So if a man is not feeling that deeper connection with himself in a soul and heart and just integrative way, and it's become just about not doing the thing, then there might be time to just look a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, my compass for me is when I'm noticing myself getting complacent or lethargic or just kind of not feeling as connected to my higher self and spirit. I'll go time without ejaculating, and my life force will increase. And then if it's been enough time, and opportunity comes, then I'll indulge myself. But it's a good point, is that to kind of use your own compass as to whether or not you release or not. Separately, it's in the spiritual community, it's a kind of a hot topic, and I'm curious what your take on it. Um, what's your take on sexual promiscuity, on having multiple sexual partners and being in a phase of your life? Some people call it a hoe phase for men and women when they have multiple sexual partners. What's your take on
My
that?
slut era.
Is it correct to demonize it? Is it not? Like, what's your take on that? What's the line between it being a healthy behavior and not being a healthy behavior?
So the way I see it, this is this is a really popular one too. I've had a lot of conversations in this particular topic. Um, the way I see it, any of the relationship models can be used as a way to escape or avoid parts of ourselves that we don't like or that we're afraid of looking at. Monogamy could be that way. It could be unconscious. It could just be, this is the way that it's done, and everything that all you other people do is wrong or weird or whatever. Or we could be in the other camp of the other extreme of, if you're only with one partner, you're not evolved enough, you're not spiritual enough, you're just, I'm sure you've heard it all. I'm sure you've heard it, that you're not open-minded enough. So anytime that there is this sense of separation or judgment, I like to check my internal compass with that. Like, what am I judging this camp of people for, or this or that? And bringing it back to my own perceptions and judgments of myself. As for what things look like in form, if this person chooses to be with 10 people, 10 partners all at once, I don't know, or this person has only had sex with one person their entire lives, that's actually me. I've only ever been with one man. Then it's such a personal decision. For me, so much of it has to do with what is my specific path in this life? And am I being true to that? And for someone being true to theirs, it might look like having multiple committed relationships or having a bunch of casual kind of flings for whatever seasons of their life. I cannot tell you how many people have come into my DMs and said and asked me, is it okay that I don't want to sleep with everybody? Because everybody's trying to push me to do that, and I don't feel like that's my path. And so I find myself having a lot of those conversations of reassuring people, like, you know what, we opened our relationship for about 1.5 years, and I didn't find any, we didn't make those connections with anybody that we felt were worth exploring sexually.
Yeah, my only concern with it is, I'm never into shaming or judging anyone who's engaged in that behavior. My concern is my experience when I was borderline addicted to sex. I realized it was because I had sexual trauma growing up and never dealt with it, and then it was basically me masking that. I was engaged in the behavior constantly to avoid that wounding or to maybe gain power from it in some way. So, what's your take on that? Like, how much of, or how often is it that sexually promiscuous people are trying to put a band-aid on wounding from past sexual experiences they need to heal?
I mean, there's always that possibility.
Yeah.
The thing is that I can never tell for another person if that's what they're doing or not, but I can check with myself and say, okay, this is either right for me or aligned with me, or it isn't. I have met a lot of people. When we did open our relationship, we did meet a lot of people who were swingers, who were in the lifestyle. We met some really cool, interesting people. And we also got to hear more of their stories, of their journey of realizing somewhere along the way that they approached this lifestyle unconsciously at the time, right, in an effort to fix something that was missing or fill a void that was missing in their relationship, because they didn't know how to navigate that. They didn't know how to talk about it or what to do about it. So yeah, I think that anything could be used as kind of a mask for not looking at our stuff.
For sure. And you often refer to in this conversation as sex being this magical experience that you can connect with the divine. What are ways we can maybe avoid the transactional aspect of it, kind of just using each other as masturbation devices, and how can we move away from that into benefiting from this magic and this divinity? Is that in conversations we have? Like, how do we actually move away from that kind of mutual masturbation into a divine act of creation?
I'm going to bring it back again to the connection, the individual connection with that source. When, I guess more on a psychological or practical level, for Ryan, for example, when he got to the point in his journey where he was healing his wounding around his mother, that was a massive shift for us. And same for me, healing my wounding around my father. How much of that we projected onto each other. It kind of strips the erotic
what
nature.
Changed? I'm curious, what changed in that? When you both healed your parental wounds, what actually shifted?
The biggest thing was we stopped treating each other like we were children, like our own children. So I would kind of mommy him and kind of I felt like I needed to tell him how to do things and control things and like make sure you do this and this. There wasn't that trust and respect. Like I would respect a king, a man. And for him with me, he would kind of try to protect me from certain things or feelings, but then it would come out anyways. It was super messy. But when you can see the divinity in each other, that's what that helped us to do more. Was it began to restore this more erotic possibility between us. And along with that, deeper, seeing the divine, the mother, the divine feminine in me, and that divine masculine in him. A lot of this comes down to how much are we respecting and revering and honoring each other outside of the bedroom? Am I actually, how do I perceive you? Do I perceive you as a child that needs caretaking? Do I perceive you as someone who needs protecting from life? Do I need to coddle you and put you in a bubble? That was how I perceived him for a long time. So you can imagine how that shaped our relationship.
How has that been for you? Because you said you've been with only one man in your life sexually, and what I mean by that is, I'm assuming you guys have healed so much together that who you are together now is way different to who you were initially. So how's it been kind of falling in love with a new version of someone over and over again? How's that experience been for you to initially have these karmic, woundings attach each other and clearing them together? What's that experience been like? I'm going to give you a break to digest all this amazing information. And in this break, please comment, like, and subscribe. Thank you.
It's been a lot. It's been intense. So we will have been married 17 years later this year. And we have 4 kids. And our younger 2 kids have had a wildly different experience of us as human beings and parents than our older 2 did. We have really grown up together. We were 20 when we got married. So Ryan and I have grown up together, and our teenagers who are now in high school have grown up with us. So it's like being in multiple marriages with the same person. Like, there are distinctly different versions of ourselves that we have been. And our presence in each other's lives in this way has shaped who we are today. Like, there's just no way around it. It's like our identity isn't in each other, but us being together for whatever that purpose, that greater purpose is, has shaped us into who we are and helped us to liberate. He has always been someone who is deeply committed to whatever he does. That's why it was so hard for me when he was disabled and depressed those 2.5 years, because I didn't see an end in sight, and he just completely lost his identity. It was a big dark night of the soul. Didn't really know it at the time, but I lost my husband, and everything had to really die before that next chapter could happen.
What made you not quit when both of you were going through, ego deaths and personal resurrections? Because in most relationships, when they hit that point, they immediately just part ways. They don't go into the symbolism of it and grow together. So what did it take for you not to quit?
Yeah. There was something in me deep down that knew, even before I knew what attachment styles were by labels, I recognized that my fear response was to run away, abandon ship before somebody else has an opportunity to abandon me. Because that was my deepest wound, was abandonment. I won't get into the details of that, but that was raw. That was a big gaping wound. And there was a very critical point of decision where I felt in my heart, in my spirit, like, I will not leave this marriage without first finding my peace within it. And that was just my personal decision. I know that there are cases where people are just unable to get any semblance of peace until they leave the relationship or have some kind of space. But what I see a lot is that when couples feel like they're at this crossroads and they know that something needs to die, they just assume that it means the relationship needs to end. And it could just be an initiation into something just on a whole other level.
Yeah.
But for me, that was what kind of got me to stick.
When do we know if it's time to go? I think love can be in that moment, your heart telling you, you know what, you should stay in this, and fear telling you should go. And then it could be the other way around, right? Your fear could be to actually other way around. You could tell yourself, you know, I actually need to go to grow. In my experience, I was in a relationship like that where I could hit a point where it was, 3 years together. It was a point where I was at the point, is it in my highest interest of love to stay in this and grow or to part ways? And what I deducted in that experience was that if I couldn't have someone who was growing with me, not in the same rate, but mutually using these downtimes or these ego deaths to grow together and hold each other through it, then that would be the only way. But the fact that the other side of my equation didn't want to do that, didn't want to grow through it, that was my lesson to part ways. So, in your opinion, how do we know in that moment whether it's actually a better move to stay or go? I think so many of us people I meet are in relationships where they're perpetually at that point for years at their point of like, I don't know whether this is right for me or not. How can you help guide people to get to that point where they know in their heart, I should stay in this for my growth or not?
So there is no clear line in the sand for that. Like,
Okay.
this is the point. Now I'm done. People will generally feel somewhere in there the truth of their heart. I personally encourage couples, especially whichever one of them is saying, okay, well, I'm doing the work and they're not, or they have no interest in it, or yeah, they're just not on board. There's a big difference between someone who is just not doing the work, but is kind of open to how you're doing the work and witnessing you doing the work, versus someone who is shutting you down and criticizing you and saying, like, further distancing and contracting and separating themselves because you're doing the work. For me, what I experienced with Ryan was he had this just like enough of a sense of curiosity, even though it was matched by his by his level of cynicism. He's like, I don't know what you've got going on over here, but you're different and it's kind of weird. So there was a period of a few months where he was very skeptical, and he would test me to see if this was really me. Is this really Luci, or is she trying to manipulate me into changing something about myself?
Mm.
So you got to remember that there's a lot of things going on. Just as one person begins doing the work, they're fucking with the dynamic. So it's going to inevitably bring up shadows in the other person. At some point, people get a sense of, okay, this is going in the direction that I meant to go in it with, or it's time to go. I personally, again, recommend not making these big decisions in moments of heightened emotion. These
Mhm.
big decisions in moments of heightened emotion. That'll just save you a lot of heartache.
For
Not
sure.
making those threats of, well, I'm going to break up with you, or I'm getting a divorce, or I'm leaving, I'm taking the kids. I used to do that all the time, and that created so much unsafety in our relationship that just kind of set us back a peg. But that takes so much self-discipline and self-control in the moment sometimes when
For
people are
sure.
not used to that.
Yeah. I'm curious about your take on boundaries because they're a very, hot topic in the self-help world, the relationship work. Um, and my issue with them, well, I'm curious at your take on it, is that so often I see people using boundaries as an excuse to control someone to not make them feel triggered. That you're basically like just molding someone into a person that won't make you triggered. So how can you, first, is that an issue you see? And two, how can we create boundaries that's not the main cause? We're not using it to control. Like, what's a healthy boundary? What's an unhealthy boundary in a relationship?
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, the word boundaries has been weaponized as a means of, yeah, molding somebody into what we wish that they were. I've definitely done that.
Same here.
When
Yeah.
we start learning start therapizing everything, and when we were
Yeah.
both coaches, after a while, we would be like, "No, you're projecting. No, you're doing this. You're getting to." It was so crazy. But the thing about boundaries is when you are living in devotion to love, right? Those boundaries are not hard set, they're fluid.
Mhm.
In this moment, I might not appreciate somebody coming into the room and making out with me, right? Like I don't want him to, I mean, I wouldn't mind. I don't think you would mind. But you know that that would be a, hey, can you please can we do this later? But in 30 minutes, I would love it if he came in here and did that. So it's being so present with what's so in the present that we we can not only be aware of but also communicate what's most true for us right now. Yesterday's boundary doesn't translate into today's boundary. And so the way that I see boundaries, the biggest boundary that I personally have is the boundary that I set with the voice of fear. And that if I use that as my guiding post instead of what do I feel entitled to receiving right now and make that my boundary. By the way, that's not a boundary, that's an entitlement. Demands, I've often gotten confused for boundaries as well. But a healthy boundary is not trying to control you. It has to do with me. If you yell, I'm going to leave the room. And at other moments, we could say, hey, can you please stop yelling? And my system has the capacity to do that. So the way that we use boundaries, if we do that in service of love, it will not always be comfortable either. Because our ego's boundaries or our fear's boundaries, we find are wildly different than our soul boundaries.
Yeah. What I tell myself in my past relationships is I'd ask myself, are you in love right now or are you afraid of love? That's what I kind of come back to myself is that am I doing this out of love or out of protection because I'm scared of trauma? How common is that people acting out of a fear of love rather than actually being
Yeah,
in love, kind of
that's really
protecting
common,
themselves?
actually.
Yeah.
It's like we're
Why,
most terrified of love
why do you think that is?
because it's like we're afraid to be consumed by it. It does obliterate you. I mean, to be fair.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I get it. I found myself in that place many, many times. And I'm just at a different layer. There's still more. There's always more. I'm like, when it never ceases to amaze me how deep that love goes
Yeah.
and how much resistance I can still have to it.
Yeah. It's just common, again, on the notion along the boundaries that makes me kind of question things is this commitment to being so afraid of getting hurt in romance. For me, I kind of experienced that's hard to fall in love and be afraid of getting hurt at the same time. That you kind of have to free fall into the unknown to being like, this may hurt me. This may cause so much pain. I have no idea. Do you think that's true? That it's kind of hard to be afraid to get hurt and fall in love at the same time.
I think I mean, the whole thing is a big surrender, right?
Yeah.
Just like an orgasm. You got to be able to
Yes.
like let go of control to experience all the best parts. But also along with that does come the possibility of heartbreak. And at some point, whether you are, I mean, in our relationship, we've had many, many moments of heartbreak, like crushing, gut wrenching heartbreak. And that didn't even involve us separating or getting a divorce.
Yeah.
So there will be those moments where because that's my own heartbreak that was like happening from the inside out. It wasn't him at cause of it. Maybe that's a different
Yeah.
conversation, but you know,
Yeah. Just also on that point, the biggest lessons I've learned are from my heart getting broken. So I'm not opposed to it. Like who I am today is quite literally as a man is a result of getting my heart broken multiple times. And the man I've grown is because of that. I think our heart has the ability to be broken open. I think people who are truly empathetic and sensitive have been through a lot of pain. That if you go to church and you see, the cross and Jesus on it, it's a symbol of it. It's that when we see human suffering, our heart opens up. So if your heart opens up with pain, it's a beautiful thing, right? I'm assuming when you're heartbroken with experiences, you grew from it.
yeah. Yeah, and those are those places where you feel as broken as you can feel in that pain. When you really let the love in, that's when you feel completely obliterated. Like you're like, who even am I? Like if I am this love, it's a real mind fuck, you know?
Yeah.
And to recognize that we are often running away from it.
What's your method of doing that in the sense of, let's say, I also share an abandonment wound. So in your experience, when that comes up or has come up, let's say your partner does something to trigger it. How can you in that moment, what are things you do or know to do to return to love and move away from fear?
So if I'm having a really intense, like in body experience, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
having an intense emotional response, I have my space to come and like usually it's literally this space. This is my office, this is my ritual space. And I will do whatever I feel like my body needs to do. Maybe that's cry, maybe that's scream into a pillow, maybe that's do some kind of a rage ritual or do um, a do a big emotional cleanse or purge and then connect with my inner child and ask her what she needs. It could be a number of things. But what I like to do first is have the energetic kind of purification. All of I think of it as the purification of fear. And so I'm not going to run away from all these stories I'm telling myself or all the fears that are coming up, but I'm just giving them some space, some in a safe space to emerge and just be expressed and not destroy things. you know, I may or may not say these things in front of Ryan. It depends. Now, today, we have this understanding that when those stories come out, that this is not the truth. This is just part of purifying that ego voice that is like, oh my God, I'm dying. I can't, I'm unsafe. And if the other person has the capacity to hold and witness that in love, then the person experiencing it you know, um, can let that be witnessed. And that's a really powerful practice too. But otherwise, I would do it by myself, take whatever time I need, only amplify the emotions to the extent that it's actually serving, the whole experience and not spiraling. And then return back to a place of grounding and do whatever practices help me with that. But I also like to literally visualize my heart in its current state. Sometimes in those moments, it would have like vines around it and feel really tightly wrapped. And then just imagine like softening it and letting the vines begin to unwrap and open. And if I can just get it a little bit more open, let it open a little bit more than it was before, then I can let that love just flow in through that little crevice, however small it might be, and let that be enough.
Mhm.
And let that love do the rest of the work.
You mentioned witnessing in there. I think it's a powerful point to touch upon now, in that I think a lot of the suffering we experience in relationships is holding shame about what we're going through. Um, and what happens then, in my experience, the more ashamed, trigger response and wasn't open about it, the more I'd leak the anger and the shadow, the outwards. And in my experience, what's been powerful is just sharing what I'm going through without a need to be fixed or placing blame. Just saying, I'm going through this trigger because of this. You didn't do anything wrong. I just want to say it just so you know and see me for it. And the shame just goes away and you're back into love. Do you agree that it's a powerful thing to do? And how do you and your partner practice that? And how has it helped you cultivate a better relationship?
Yeah, we have definitely practiced that. Again, depending on the level of intensity of the emotion. So they say if it's hysterical, it's historical, right? Like the
Yeah.
most intense reactions have just go back the furthest. Um, Sometimes we have not been able to have that clear of a communication until we have the space to just process the wildness of the emotions. I think everyone also has a different temperament and just a different kind of natural way that they process things emotionally in their bodies. But for us, we have a lot of, I don't know how much astrology you're into, but we have a lot of fire and water. So there's a lot of deep feelings and it can get like really crazy. So we learned that we had to honor that space for each other. But yeah, there are now many moments where I will just, for example, for me, I will every month when my luteal phase comes 5 days before I start bleeding, it's the most just like, man, wow, I feel a lot. And I see that now as a gift. Whatever I'm feeling sensitive to, it's not by coincidence. So I will bring that up to him and he will just listen. He knows that I don't need anything to be fixed about it. And it takes a lot to really learn that for a lot of couples, men and women. It's hard to just watch the person that you care so much about suffer through something or just have a hard time and not fix it. And so, yes, that has been and continues to be a big part of our relationship.
How do you draw that line if you see your partner suffering? At what point is your care trying to fix versus just being there? How have you created that line of when to know when it's fixing or you just caring for your partner?
Well, I mean, for us, we have such a long time of experiences of each other's shadows that it's kind of like he can call me out on my bullshit and vice versa. We just recognize it. We're like, I smell shit. This isn't okay. Where we're giving space for emotions, but at some point it's like, okay, like you got this. It's okay. That line, we don't frequent that line very much anymore.
Okay.
And it's not that it never happens, but it's more of an ability to self regulate from going that far. If they really are just witnessing with love and they're not there to caretake, and the person that's expressing can recognize that the person witnessing is just like an in-body representation of that divine source, that's who's the ultimate witness. This person is just there, like in form, looking at you and maybe available to give you a hug or rub your back or whatever. But the more that we resist internally as the witness, oh my God, am I doing this right? Am I staying too long? Am I enabling her? Then you're keeping yourself from having the depth of a healing experience that it could be for you. Does that make sense? I know I kind of went on a trail there.
No, it makes sense. You're good. A lot of good points there. But now I want to kind of ask a question on the left field, which I think, again, it's a thing I've struggled answering in my experience. A lot of men do that I think is you have a powerful answer to. I think in the initial stages of womanhood, like in juvenile aspects, maybe in the late teenage years or early 20s or some point, why are a woman drawn to the bad boy?
Yeah, so women, not everyone is either, but it's a stereotype, right? Like it's common enough that oh, she likes the bad boys. Um, I was, I think I could classify as that. I was drawn to the bad boy, maybe not bad boy, like somebody who's out there, like, so, doing the more extreme stuff. But I wanted the guy who, Ryan was in the military and he was the kind of guy that would do all the crazy things that nobody else was willing to do. He would do handstands on the side of a cliff. Like that was the guy that he was. I first was attracted to him when I saw him in these cliff jumping photos, doing backflips off a cliff. But my father was a crazy son of a bitch too. He was in the jungles. He would get crazy animals from the black market. So I just kind of assumed like this is just me because my father was the person that he was, and so I just kind of unconsciously chose someone in my wounding, in that state of
Yeah.
mind, who's like my father. But on a deeper level, I think that a lot of women are attracted to the bad boy because they crave that dark masculine presence. They just don't recognize that that is the shadow version of it. Um, when a woman is really coming into her mature feminine embodiment, the deeper she goes into that, she tends to begin feeling this intensifying craving for the dark masculine. And what that is a man who is unafraid of his own darkness of anything, his intensity, his rawness, his primal desire, his urges. And so he's so intimately familiar with it. He's not going to run away with it. He's not going to mask it. He's not going to repress it, but he has found ways to integrate that into the truth of who he is.
Yeah, that to me marks a safe man. I think an unsafe man is someone who is not aware of a shadow and shames it and it leaks out. Like I think the men who aren't aware of the shadow are the ones that will hit women, the ones who will be abusive because they have no idea how to control. I think all men have this darkness. We all do. Women all have their darkness, and when men learn to control it through impulse control and various, initiations, they become safe.
Initiations, that's a big thing. Because whereas women, we have periods, we start bleeding, and that's kind of an initiation into womanhood. The men don't exactly have that. And I think it's important to experience that in life. So Ryan, one of his big initiations was that period of depression and disability. That just happened to be what the universe had for him.
Yeah.
But hopefully not everyone has to go through something like that.
Yeah, we often do though. I think that's where the universe works. If we're not doing it,
Yeah.
if we're not getting the whispers and the hints, we'll get hit by a truck, unfortunately. So, I know a lot of guys who are perfectly nice, they're very sweet, but they don't have the ability to kind of attract women in that way. What do you think nice guys could be doing to break out of that? To still be a kind person, but also have some of that, dark masculine to them. How can a man in that space go about that?
When I think of a nice guy, again, you use ourselves as an example. Ryan was the prime nice guy. So nice. Would do anything for anybody. To a fault. The thing about nice guys, right before that season, there's like before he went through that catalyst, and then there's like life after that. Then there are many more evolutions after that. But I'm just drawing that big distinction right here. Nice guys, not kind guys, but nice guys, people-pleasing guys, we instinctually know are not trustworthy. There's something they're hiding. There's something they're hiding so well, they're hiding it from themselves. And so one of the easiest, I think, points of entry to begin unraveling this persona of the nice guy so that they can be a truly kind man is to be ruthlessly honest with themselves about what pisses them off. That's one of the biggest red flags. It's just glazed over, like, no, it's not a big deal. It's okay. I'll let you walk over me. It's okay. And they don't have to be reactive at the person or explode at that person. But if they let that just internally, they don't do the work in that, and they don't let themselves, face that shadow, that's what inevitably eventually will come out at his partner or at his kids. And so I think the triggers, this is just basic inner work kind of, 101 stuff here, but being more aware of what he's triggered by, even if it's really, really subtle. For the first year and a half that Ryan got into this work, he did this thing, his release the rage process in his closet every single day. It didn't matter if it was a big fight we got into or if it was the neighbor's lawnmower going off at 6 a.m. It could be little or big. He would get into what are the stories I'm telling myself about this, and feel into his body what degree of anger or rage or frustration he was feeling, and express that in a safe container, not at me. There's a big distinction there. It still came out at me a lot in that early time, but yeah.
So a point of summary there is to watch out for being spineless, in the sense that, deep down we all have beliefs or opinions that are different that we should stand up for. And the more that you step into that power of, speaking what you believe is true, the more it's attractive. Is that true? Do women respond well to men who have a spine in that way, who will stand up for what they think is right rather than being kind of walked all over?
Yes, and their truth. And there is a difference too. Like, he's really got to do this journey within himself to be able to discern between the truth of his heart and big truth, right? Big T truth. That's what I like to call it. And the little T truth of his ego. That's like, well, this is what I need to feel just protected and safe in my own identity right now. And when he can show up in that way, oh my God, it's the hottest thing. Ryan did a 41-day water fast earlier this year. And
Wow.
It was so intense for me because I'm like, I don't have my my partner to go on my walks with every day. I don't have somebody available sexually for me. And it took about 2.5 months before we were able to have sex again, because it wasn't just the fast, but it was then recovering from the fast and regaining strength. And those first 2 weeks were the hardest because I faced all these entitlements that I had to his body, even though I'm free to do whatever I want. I don't want to be with anybody else. I just want you, but I can't have you. So it's just, confronting all these things. But he drew this delineation in the sand of, this is what I'm doing. I felt, the spirit calling me to do this. I said yes, and I'm doing it. And man, as angry as I was and just feeling like, what about me? I had just the utmost respect for him for listening to that truth, even though he knew the consequence, the fallout that would happen.
Yeah. Why do you think that cultivates polarity in the masculine feminine dynamic? The man kind of sticking a sword in the sand and saying, I have to do this. I have to take this journey. Why does that cultivate more polarity? Why does that turn you on more?
I think, more than polarity, I think it cultivates trust.
Okay.
So, because you can have polarity and it can be unhealthy or kind of, not really serve you, either of you. But when you have that trust and you have that respect, I feel I can trust him to listen to the voice of the divine, and that he will not use that against me or weaponize it against me. If that makes sense? Like, to serve his ego, to serve his personal, just little self-protecting efforts.
That makes sense. That I think that's where a man is dangerous. An impulsive man is a dangerous man. So if you can notice that he can not be impulsive and surrender to a higher calling in spite of his lower calling, that to you is what's safe and honorable. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I
that safety, it just it breeds all kinds of desire.
For sure. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on, especially just your unbrazen, honesty and vulnerability, especially in the sexual department. I think that's one of the hardest things to do nowadays. Is to, even for me, it's one of the things I'm challenging with this conversation, is being fully open sexually. So just all kudos to you and power to you for being that way and honoring that side of yourself.
Thank you, Lucas, and thank you for going there. And thank you for going straight into those places.
Of course. Where can people find you to learn more about your stuff and work with you if they want to?
All the current offerings and links will be at lucilampe.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at Luci Lampe and TikTok at Luci Lampe Official.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to watch more content, please click this video right here and don't forget to subscribe right here. Thank you.